want to thank you for meeting with me, first of all. I know you're on TikTok. You have like 13K followers. I don't have
Yeah,
shit yet, but
don't worry about it, man.
all right. So, can you give the audience something like your background, who you are, what your name is, and like not last name if you don't want to, but
Oh yeah, my name's Kamar. Obviously I make TikToks, but I'm an athlete, go to Penn State. I study economics, I study international relations, I studied classical history, got a minor in Christian studies and a minor in Jewish studies or biblical studies, better yet, better said.
okay, yeah, because like I know like you're pretty well studied, and that's why I wanted to have you on. And
Thanks.
that's why, but you're an athlete. What sport do you play?
I do fencing.
Oh, fencing. I,
Yeah.
I've never fenced before, so I'll
Hey,
have
it's a lot of fun.
to try that
I just
some.
got back from a tournament. That's why it was so hard for me to like rush back here. I literally just got back from a tournament yesterday.
Ah, did you win?
Got fifth, so I can't complain.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So, like, as far as like politically, what would you say you align yourself with? Are you like left leaning, right leaning, libertarian?
So this is an interesting question. I don't have a political affiliation. I support policy.
I get
And
that. I do the same thing.
and when you label yourself, oh, I am strictly on the left, or I'm strictly on the right, or I'm strictly whatever, the problem becomes these aren't sports teams. Like
Exactly.
the way that people look at politics in the United States, I feel like, is they treat it like sports, where it's like let's say I'm a big Hawks fan, right? I don't like the Hawks as an institution. I will support the Hawks as an institution. Like it doesn't matter who's on the roster. It doesn't matter who's like scoring. If they're good or the bad, I am a Hawks fan. To like that's it. Politics shouldn't be the same way. They're a dynamic
Exactly.
thing. And when people start like, I think it's just because a lot of Americans, sports is such a really big thing in our lives in a way that it isn't in other parts of
Yeah.
the world. Like I've noticed that it's just not a sports team, man. So like I can't say if I'm on this side or this side. Like I pick individual policies that I think work the best, and a lot of those policies are on the left. Like there are left-leaning policies. Left is kind of also a relative term because like even the American left is a European really right. So we have to kind of like, for instance, like free healthcare is like a really radically left thing, but the rest of the world has it. Even like places that we think of are far right places or dictatorships or whatever, we think of them as like what? But
Yeah.
that, yeah, so it really depends. But to the American standard, I don't have a political affiliation. A lot of the things that I do support are rather left leaning, but yeah.
I'm kind of the same way. Like I talk to people on the right and people on the left. Like most people are like live their little echo chamber. Like they don't see anything else. They don't hang out with other kinds of people. And that's
And the thing is, people don't understand how big America is. Like,
it's the third biggest country on the planet, I think.
yeah, like, but if you drive through America, you'll realize that there are a lot of communities that are just like purely isolated, like don't
Yeah.
have anything nearby, have a Walmart, a Dollar General, like 12 houses, a school, maybe a hospital if you're really lucky, and that's it. And that's what the majority of America is. So, of course, a lot of America is going to be like different because they're like isolated pocket communities that have lived that way forever.
I mean, yeah, I have many experience driving through when I drive to, I live in Kansas. I live in, so like I live in the city, but like you go
Yeah,
out, there's small ass towns everywhere. And
mhm,
like, especially when you drive, like there's like lots of nothing.
for sure.
But like, you have to get gas while there and you don't stop until you get to Colorado. And like, that's how it is.
Yeah.
Small towns, like very isolated. I live in the city with all different kinds of people. So I had experience. So I
Yeah.
had a lot of experiences. So I think Americans like tend to like root for, like as you mentioned earlier, root for their sports teams, like they root for politician, like political parties, diehard Republicans, diehard Democrats, and they don't like see like that these people aren't supposed to be gods or kings or
Yeah.
like favorite football player or whatever. Like you need to like criticize them when you disagree with them and support them obviously when you agree with them. So
Oh, yeah, for sure. I was thinking about it like no one's going to convince me to not be a Hawks fan. Like I know we're a perfectly mid
yeah.
basketball team, but that's my team.
And so I
Like
mean I
that's my
struggle.
team. I'm from Atlanta. I love the Hawks. I've always loved the Hawks. I will always love the Hawks. But loving the Hawks is not building a nation. Loving the Hawks is not a matter of where we need the best minds here. I don't need the best team. The Hawks is my team for better or worse. I we shouldn't have a for worse part of our political affiliations. Like
Yeah,
we should want the best.
we should be the best we can be, like have the best minds, the most moral minds, because you don't want people stealing shit from the government, and you don't want people stealing shit from the country and the people of the country. You want to have like good people with a lot of integrity that know what they're doing, especially in higher offices.
Yeah, I think that's also part of the problem. A lot of the people who would be really good at these things tend to bow out of them because they feel like they're not qualified. So, in a way, because it's popularity and not nomination, I think a lot of the best minds are people who be like, yeah, I just don't want to do this. I don't think I'm qualified enough.
I mean, like with the whole like money in politics, especially because like as you mentioned earlier, people are very isolated in a lot of America. And to get the candidate's name out there, like on ads and like stuff like that, you need to have a lot of money and a lot of
Yeah.
donors. And that's where like the donors come in, especially when it comes to bringing money to fund the campaign. That way, usually people with the more campaign funds win because they get noticed more.
Well, yes and no, because I don't think Donald Trump had the most campaign funds. I think Kamala Harris had more. But the problem also is you can play your voter base, especially if you recognize that you have a voter base that might be less educated, or you might have a voter base that you think you can manipulate a little bit better. And I always say this with like the black market thing. If you and I were trying to convince a room full of kids that $1 is worth less, what no that a $100 bill is worth more than a bag full of quarters, you would have a much harder time than I would. And if I package it well enough, nothing that you say will be able to convince this room of children that your $100 bill is worth more than a sack full of quarters. And if I can convince these kids that, hey, like your $100 bill is worth less than these quarters, I'm helping you by giving you these quarters and you give me this $100 bill. Like, I'm going to win because at the end of the day, I get the $100, the kids get the quarter, so they're happy. And no matter what, if you convince the kids, like, no,
I
you
try
need to,
to,
if you convince the kids, like, you need to hold on to this $100, they're forever going to be mad at you because I can just simply say, like, see, he's making you keep it. He doesn't like you. Da, da, da. Like, my message is just so much easier to sell. And that's kind of like how politics has gotten in the United States, especially with these rural communities that don't really have access to a lot of things. And especially when we're in a literacy crisis, like it's just really easy to manipulate people out from either way.
yeah, because like people that have like because like the kids they don't know too much about quarters and dollars.
Move
So
money, they
the
don't know
quarter
the
is shiny. The dollar is a
exactly.
piece of paper.
You see it,
Like
you got a nice heavy quarter and a bag full of them. They're shiny, they catch your eye, and you got a $1 bill with an old dude's face on it and 100 on the side. And
what looks
I,
more appealing to us to someone who doesn't know too much about money, right?
exactly what looks more appealing. And it's a great and a perfect way of me saying this is a perfect way of like demonstrating this politically. If I say, "Hey, you're never going to pay taxes again," that sounds great, especially to somebody who's lower income, feels like, "Why am I working and I'm not getting my money?" Sweet, I'm never going to have to pay taxes again. Sweet. The people also who say sweet are like, oh my God, like I save money. But they also don't need the government funds because they have their own money to go to private hospitals. They have their own money to go to private schools. They have their own money to, let's say, if they wanted to pave their own roads, they could. They don't need Social Security. They don't need any of the things that they could hire their own police defense if they really wanted to. They don't need social services. So ultimately, the people who are benefiting most are the people with a bunch of money. And they're like, yeah, sweet, I save money on taxes. It's cheaper for me to buy these things individually when I need them. However, the lower income person is like, oh, yes, I save my money because they ultimately don't realize that they're paying along with everybody else for the things that they depend on. Because
Because
it's a lot easier to sell somebody a message that's simple.
yeah, because keep in mind they don't know like the entire how the tax system works. They don't branch out of their community. One of the top Google searches after the election was what happened to Joe Biden? Why is Joe Biden not running? And
Yeah.
guaranteed he drop out late. So Kamala Harris had 100 days to run a campaign. And a lot of people don't know the vice president. A lot of people don't see the vice president on TV.
Yeah. I think
So ultimately, because people know Donald Trump, everyone knows who he is. He was president before, and before that, he was a celebrity game show host, celebrity real estate person. I'm not like he was big already.
Yep. And it's an interesting situation because voting as an American means you do have to vote with the weight of the world on you because the choices and things that happen here have repercussions all over. It's kind of like the
Exactly.
Ronald Reagan effect. Most people alive right now are negatively impacted by something Ronald Reagan did. It's a fun little game you can play. Like you can pick most countries around the world that he and like something ties back to
Yep.
him negatively and knowing that means like, hey, if I'm voting, I need to vote responsibly for me, but also for the other 8 billion people I share the planet with. And if you're stuck in your small community, it's really easy to think of the other 8 billion people as like a concept. Like, they exist, like
But you don't
conceptually.
know they exist
Yeah, like conceptually, I know I know that they're there, but like I've never really seen them. So it's like they're there, but kind of the same way that if I read a book and the character, they're real, like kind of like they'll rationalize them that way. And it's like, well, what can we expect to happen?
because the reason that everybody in the world cares about the American election is because who Americans elect has an effect on them. Whereas if the presidential election, we don't care, you and I don't give a shit about the president of like Equatorial Guinea or something. Like
Oh
their
man,
elections don't matter much here than ours do over there.
yeah. Equatorial Guinea is a really interesting
I
situation.
just picked a I just picked a random country, I'm not gonna lie.
Equatorial Guinea, I think that's the African country that speaks Spanish, the one that has like all the oil and the dictator who takes the UN money and then goes parties in I feel like this is a perfect
Yep.
example of politics. Like this is a perfect example for what like how you can convince somebody that you're actively doing harm to because the explanation is like kind of counterintuitive. And I also think like it's like the flaw with democracy and it's like it's the best thing that we have, but obviously everything is flawed. It is only as strong as the people are educated, and a system that is like predicated upon extraneous solutions is obviously never good because you can't control extraneous solutions to the highest degree. And when people are so easily manipulated, it becomes really hard because you kind of have to like gaslight them in a way because like yes, your feelings are real. But like yes, the black market, I know it says that it's black, but it's not actually a black market. And
Yes.
like it's really hard to convey these ideas, which is why I think like until the education crisis gets solved, the political future in the United States is just screwed.
And I think with the Department of Education being defunded, we need the Department of Education because I know other people who criticize the Department of Education say that we're only 23rd in the world in education. Why it's not working? We put that there because our system is flawed and we needed it to help educate the general populace.
So one thing that you'll notice when dealing with really intelligent people and people who are not very intelligent is how well they can handle nuance. And that boils down to is it black or white? And a lot of the people that we're seeing, especially in the country now, reduce everything to being black or white. Whereas, so for example, a lot of the cuts that Donald Trump is making, it doesn't have to be take it or leave it. It can be a restructuring.
Yep.
And it's like this whole spectrum of things they're just eradicating and getting rid of and jumping straight to the cutting part of it. And
No more Department of Education, no more USA, no more this, no more that. But like we
it's
can
a
like look at these
terrible situation. Oh,
we could look at these systems and say what needs to be fixed, what is working well, which we can build on, and what is not working so well, which we can either cut or fix.
but
We
this
don't
is
have to
a
cut the entire thing.
Yeah, and this is a really hard sell because you have to convince people of some like it's kind of why Donald Trump's plan that he put on his website was 7 pages and Kamala Harris's was like 40 because he met his supporters where they were at, and a lot of his supporters, frankly, just at the time didn't possess the ability to sift through the high level economics and the high level like nuance in government restructuring and the impact on tariffs in different industries and like the deficit growth that would be experienced through tax cuts and what that would mean in terms of budget reduction in certain critical areas like they didn't really know all that so it's just really easy to say we're going to make America great again and then people are like yeah the country's great And like,
But is it? I mean, it is. It is. It
no,
to
no,
a degree,
it's
but
not. Like
it is to
objective.
a degree, but it's not to a degree as well. We're not like number one in a lot of. We're number one in a lot of things, but we're also not number one in a lot of things. We're
As
also
someone who's been like all over the world, America's number one in convenience. That's like,
we have the best arts. All American art is like music, movies, are shown out throughout the world.
well, the problem is you can't quantify art.
You can't,
Art,
but in
art is
general,
for the person who consumes it, right? So what's
that
fun to
is
me
true.
can be fun to you. If you're using like streaming metrics, like okay, but also most of the
Yeah,
streaming come from America.
that is
So
also
like
true.
America's greatness is really hard to quantify, in my opinion. But also like in terms of critical things, America is not doing like a very, very good job. Like infrastructure is not good. Infrastructure connection is not good, right? Like in certain cities, the infrastructure is so spread out that you need a car. Urban sprawl is terrible. Not to mention like public transportation. Then we have public services. Like, why has every kid in Baltimore failed their math proficiency test? Like,
Underfunded schools,
yeah, yeah,
underfunded everything, pretty much.
yeah. Yeah, it's a very interesting situation to live in, especially because when we were kids, we saw 2008. We're like, oh, well, at least can't
Housing
get.
crisis was
Yeah, we saw the
really
housing
bad.
crisis. And we were like, oh, it can't get worse than this. And then we're like, oh,
Then
great.
12 years later, the pandemic happened, and
Yeah.
a third of the country was out of work for a time.
I feel like the pandemic also is a great example of what happens when you get rid of stuff instead of gradually phase things out. Like they had a pandemic board that
They
Obama put
did.
Donald
They
Trump
did.
rid of.
And then that
Yeah.
happened. So again,
So,
like people don't understand like like nuances of situations. Like I think the third most Google search result of November 6th was like, what is a tariff? Because the majority of people, a lot of people don't know what tariffs are.
and like, okay, I won't blame people for not knowing what a
Yeah,
tariff.
I mean,
Tariff, like, it is a complicated geopolitical tool used to stimulate industry in
I
countries
get
that's complicated. Like, I understand it. However, that highlights that people just this is what happens when we have all of the information at our fingertips with none of the discernment skills because like like it's easy to read things and it's hard to understand them, but now we can read everything that requires the hard understanding that we don't have. And that's really interesting because I do economic research at Penn State with my professor. She actually covered something with tariffs, which was really interesting. And she explained that like tariffs existed super common in like the 1900s, and they normally preceded crises. Like every time there's been like blanket tariffs,
yep.
shortly after there's been like an insane financial
The
crisis.
Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930 like made the Great Depression a lot worse. It
Yep.
prolonged it actively,
Yeah.
led to FDR and the New Deal, and
And all that kind of stuff, right? But also tariffs, the way that Donald Trump was trying to use tariffs as like getting rid his original plan to get rid of income tax and then use tariffs, right? That's only been done in countries that really don't have a lot of revenue. And I actually did take some notes on this if I can only find where they were. I can't find where they were. But
you find
I
them, just send me some notes. Send me some notes.
yeah,
So
like I'll send them to you so you can look over them. But the countries that have the most tariffs are the countries that have no apparatus for taxation. Where there's no sophisticated taxation apparatus, you need tariffs because the state needs to make money. This is why it was super common in Russia after the fall of the USSR, because ultimately that was the only way the state could make a lot of money because the taxation system wasn't being done well. I'm doing a lot of work now with the Russian like tax service in the United, like getting data off of there. I can see how backwards this is. So like, and if it's this bad, a lot of the data I have is starting collecting in 2014. If it is this disorganized in 2014, I can only imagine how bad it was in 1991. So it makes sense. A lot of the countries that have blanket tariffs are countries that have no sophisticated taxation system. Chad, a really big one. Nigeria is decently big. Um, A lot of African countries, pretty much, like a lot of underdeveloped African countries that are torn by war with poor institutions. So, as the United States, a country that has sophisticated taxation institutions, why would we do something that is designed for a country that has none?
I don't have any. I mean, you're the one who's more an expert this than I am. I don't have any clue. I don't know if you have any clue why
I
people
don't.
think
And that's
that.
been like the biggest thing that I've been struggling. Like every argument that I've heard about this has frustrated me to kingdom come because my type of economics is international economics with a focus on development. So tariffs, international trade, international finance policy, da 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 da. Da. So this is like my whole degree. And it's really frustrating because I hear people say like, "Oh, tariffs make America great again." Yeah, and it's like, dude, first and foremost, they always have preceded economic crises. Second of all, they're only used in countries that have weak economies that don't have industry really, right? Because what industry existed in Russia in 1991? Crime, and crime was the number one like industry until like 1996. So that's dead. Chad, what does Chad export?
I don't know.
Yeah, me
I
neither.
forget it exists in the country sometimes. Even
Yeah,
when I
like
know
the
I can put
thing,
it on a map, but I don't like know what's in it.
yeah, like the thing is, the countries that do this are countries that are really struggling. We have all of the services. We are a service economy that can export services to the rest of the world. Why are we reverting? It's regression and it's mind blowing.
I think that maybe people who want tariffs maybe want to like control more. It's like a bigger control thing. Maybe it's my conspiracy hat on, but maybe it's just like because I don't understand why we would regress, like we would lose economic output, especially with our closest allies, Canada and Mexico, two of our three largest trading partners.
So
Like,
that's really funny because they called it the art of the deal. And it could be a way for Donald Trump to secure a political win. But the border security thing was already announced by Canada in like November, and he said that it and somehow it magically became a thing, right? I think we have a problem on our hands when it comes to the tariff thing and when it comes to why people are supporting it. And I feel like, first and foremost, everything is a conspiracy to those who are uneducated on how things
yep,
work. Because, surprise, it's easy to speculate if you don't know anything. So, a lot of the people who are supporting the tariff saying, like, oh my God, there's like a conspiracy here to really try and, like, we have to drain the swamp. There's a liberal conspiracy and we need to try to take everything back. Like, no, you just don't know economics. Like, and
yeah.
secondly,
I mean,
a lot of,
like
yeah.
the more like complicated a situation is, the more people are susceptible to conspiracy because they don't know the inside workings of said thing. Right now,
Yeah.
I have a box, right? You know, the box is it's a cardboard box. You open it up, that's how it opens up. There's no like mysterious magic involved. Like, and I think anybody who can see this knows that there's no mysterious magic involved. But if something like your phone, for example, or like my computer that I'm streaming this on, there might be a lot more involved. And some people may think, oh, this happened, the government did this, the government did that. Like,
You know, it's a really good example of this.
mhm,
Peekaboo. Have you ever played
exactly.
peekaboo with a kid? The
Yep.
kid's not developed enough to realize that you are just hiding your head behind the face. So every time it gets surprised and it's like, wow, how did that happen? This is like because they lack the development to do so. This is like a sophisticated game of peekaboo where people lack the development to realize, like, hey, the issues you're worried about are being manufactured and you are not developed enough to notice.
Exactly. Like, cause like you put your hands like you know you're a grown man, I'm a grown man, that the hands are behind the face. The kid thinks you might be hiding, you
You
might
just
have
disappear. It's
disappeared
like the face
somewhere.
is gone.
Yeah,
They don't have the object permanence to realize that they're like your face is behind their hands. So when you pop it out again, they get surprised because they forgot it's there. And that's like a really good illusion for a lot of ways that the American population works. Firstly, if we have really bad object permanence, if something's not in front of our face, we tend to forget about it. Like Luigi Mangione. A lot of people forgot about that because it's not directly in our face, right? We can blame the short attention spans, whatever. Second of all, it's easy for me as the person behind my hands to control when that kid has a reaction because I can kind of just boop, pop
yep.
out because ultimately that child does not understand how it works. So they will forever be entertained. Now, if we just change entertained to have a reaction, it becomes really easy for me to invoke an emotional reaction from the vast American populace by controlling what they see and what narratives get pushed, especially if I know my base, like Donald Trump knows his. And as a result, we end
Yeah,
up here because the rule of the majority is democracy. And when the majority of people don't know how things work, the majority of people are going to think things are a conspiracy.
the thing with that, especially with social media, it's easier now just to push one narrative. The algorithms favor one narrative over the others. The narrative they favor is the one that you see the most, that you look at the most, that you like the most, that you interact with the most. Like that's like if it's always in your face and there's no other outside narratives, there's no like that's what you're gonna see. That's what you're gonna think is true. That's what you're gonna know. It's how you're gonna go through the world. You
Oh,
get
yeah, sure.
all right.
Yeah. It's one of those things that it's like, I don't know how we move forward from here because the online spaces and the algorithms that get more sophisticated form like little islands where like you watch one thing and it's like a ferry that'll take you to this island. You watch another thing and it'll ferry you to this island. And now we have these separate communities in all these online spaces that have real world implications like this election, like the conservative movement and the like the conservative movement in the United States, like the anti-immigration movement in Europe. We can even take this to the Rohingya Muslims back in Myanmar. Like, I just don't know how we go from here. And that's a very frustrating thought, I guess.
Yeah, the Rohingya Muslims is like a really messed up case of social media
Yeah.
turning into literal genocide.
Yep. Entirely. And I can't remember the president. I can't remember her name, but she kind of just capitalized on the situation. The thing is, the feelings were there, and social media just kind of catalyzed the tragic events that occurred that pushed most of the Muslims into Bangladesh.
All right, so you're an economic student, so
Yeah.
we're almost out of time here. But the first thing I want to like inflation's a big problem. It was a big not really a big problem, but a big deal of voters this election.
Donald Trump caused inflation. Point blank, period. Donald Trump dumped the most amount of money in the economy after COVID, right? And all of his COVID spending is what drove inflation. Now, if you really want to get mad at Joe Biden and say, oh, he sent the money to Ukraine and that increased government spending, which then increased the GDP growth, which increased inflation, absolutely not. The problem is with our military stockpile, it's cheaper to send the money there on a lend lease program that we get money back from, thus turning it from a liability that we have to pay to get rid of to like I think it's like an accounts receivable, right? Because we loan the money out and then we get the money back, like an account receivable. I could be wrong. I need to brush up on my finance courses. However, a lot of people said, "Oh, 200 billion to Ukraine." No, that's just the value of what we sent, and then we get the money back eventually, and or we get it back in political favors. Ultimately, it would take a lot of money to decommission these things, and once we spend the money to decommission these things, we never get it back. The money is gone.
So might as well have sell it somewhere else where there's a value, and they could maybe make
It
a
takes me
return.
$5 to destroy this shirt, and I have to destroy this shirt. I can't just leave it sitting. I can sell it to you, or I can say, yeah, you can borrow the shirt. Just give me $5 back. So now I have $10 in my bank account because I have my five original dollars that I was going to use
And
to
you
get
got
rid of the
five
shirt.
from me.
Exactly. Or I just lose the shirt and $5. So that doesn't really contribute to the like government spending part of the GDP equation because we know sharp increases in GDP growth are equated to inflation. Like we know that. Donald Trump caused it. Oh, it's really easy to write it off on Biden, and of course, like he's just going to cause it again because once again, tariffs are an like an inflationary thing. Blanket tariffs, by definition, would cause inflation. And there's another interesting concept that we have to understand. Most of the industrialization that we've had has occurred through long-term authoritarian rule, whether it is Singapore, whether it is Victorian England, whether it is the USSR, whether it is China under Mao Zedong and then Deng Xiaoping, whether it is France, whether it is Chile with Augusto Pinochet, large forms of development and rejuvenation of economies tend to coincide with dictatorships because you need long-term, unchecked political power to introduce the reforms to develop the manufacturing economy. That's just kind of how it works. Like they normally coincide together. It's how industrialization works. It's a fun little thing. You guys can look it up, fact check me if I'm wrong. You have 4 years as president. It doesn't make sense. And all you are going to do in those 4 years is create the conditions that you need to like have manufacturing to create a situation where manufacturing is more favorable, and then you won't have the time to develop the manufacturing itself.
All right, so I want to thank you for coming on the show,
Thank you.
and I'm looking forward to releasing this to the public. Uh,
Thank you. I appreciate it.
so is there any questions you have for me as far as this
Yeah,
goes?
what got you interested into this stuff?
Well, I mean, I grew up, my parents are foreigners. They came to the United States.
From where?
My mom is from Canada originally. She's French Canadian descent. And my dad, he is of Persian descent. He's from Iran.
Oh,
So
nice. Nice.
they came to America and then they had a family here. So like I was relatively getting talks, political talks, geopolitical talks from worldwide since I was about 6, 7 years old. And so I wanted to get someone on who also knew some stuff, and so we can educate the audience properly.
Yeah.
And as far as anything else goes, I don't have any other questions. So,
Question for you. Have you ever been to Iran before?
oh, once.
Once. I heard it's a very nice place. The only thing I really know about Iran, like, is the Zoroastrian religion and
That's
its
the Zeras.
thing. Yeah, like the fire and all that stuff. I think it's pretty cool.
It was like the first monotheistic religion in the world. Then
Hmm.
came Judaism, Christianity, and
Yeah, all
Islam.
that stuff.
But yeah, so I don't have any other questions, any other concerns.
Yeah,
I'll be
sure.
plugging social media in the description below so they can go hit you up on TikTok or
All
uh,
right, perfect. Appreciate it, man.
uh thank you for coming on and take care, man.